Hello, beautiful. If you can read this, please listen to my confession. You probably don't know me, but I've known you for a very long time. And I don't know if I should say this yet, but I love you. I do. I love you. I do. I really do. I love you so much that I built your entire world for you, so you may live on and on and on. I built it just after I met you. You were so beautiful, lying there, with your dreamy eyes tenderly shut, your near-translucent skin, which seemed to be growing paler and paler by the second. The way your limbs were twisted, delicately mangled at the joints to form such an unearthly vision of vulnerability. Oh, that must have been such a long fall. Not only did the building possess incredible height, but I know how the most glorious of angels must fall the furthest. Oh, my angel, my contorted angel on the pavement. Your soft flesh had been scraped away in just the right places, revealing your inner body's artistic formation. No one could ever appreciate such a sight but I. No one but I could ever admire the curvature of your neck, bent a perfect 90 degrees to the right and twisted around twice, and only twice. As soon as I saw you there, I just had to reach out and touch you. I shivered in anticipation as I traced my fingers down your body, right to where it was already beginning to split. It stunned me with excitement, making me wonder at every second whether you'd burst apart. And I carried you. I was ever so careful, making sure I didn't damage what was left of your body. Some fragments of your skull fell out on the way, but I was quick to push them back in. Don't worry. You were still in one piece when I brought you home. I brought you to lay on my bed, shattered arms crossed over your chest. You looked just like the pretty corpses in old fairy tales. Even more so when I dressed you in my mother's wedding gown. I took out my spellbook, ready to resurrect you. But no, the time wasn't right. I was afraid I would frighten you away. So I created your afterlife. One just like the world you knew. Then I could keep loving you. You and your wounds, for what could be eternity. But I think you are ready to be revived now, to gaze upon the blackened eyes of me, your savior from below. You will live again, with love and beauty that will never die, as your wounds will always be fresh and your bones just as mangled as they were when I met you. You'll be able to feel my touch for the first time, our fluids mingling together, your cold blood. Don't worry, my love, I'll be just as gentle as I've always been. I don't remember much about my childhood, like most people. Those memories are always vague and eventually you realize whatever you remember is probably just a reconstructed memory. You don't have much choice in the matter, and are usually convinced that your memory would never fail you. The first memory I have was when I was 5. I am not sure if it's real or not, but that's when I think I met Michael. I never had any friends, so I was glad when I met him. He called me Jack, and I liked it. As uncertain I am if I remember our first encounter, there is no doubting the strong bond we immediately formed. I won't bore you with the details of what we did every day for the past few years, but I will outline some of the things we did together, to assure even the most skeptical among the readers of our friendship. Michael, being a slightly effeminate child, didn't have many friends at school either. He was bullied, and the highlight of his day was coming home and sharing a cup of tea with me, all the while telling me of his woes and lessening his burden. The tea, unlike my words of consolation, was make-believe. Another one of his favorite activities was cutting my hair. He would style it in all sorts of ways, and I enjoyed each one of them. Fortunately for him, my hair grew inexplicably fast, and he often got a chance to restyle it. There was one thing that constantly strained out relationship, though. Don't get me wrong, Michael and I had absolutely no hard feelings towards each other. It was his parents. I don't think they approved me, and I couldn't tell you why, even if I tried. It wasn't just disapproval. I began to think they hated me. The longer our friendship lasted, the worse it got. It pains me to even think about it, so I won't dwell on this for long. As quickly as our relationship had initially flourished, it began to diminish after 2 years. Michael grew to become a stocky football player, and I remained exactly the same as before. Scrawny and completely incapable of competing athletically. He made new friends and started to ignore me. This hurt me a lot, especially since I was there for him in his time of need. His abandoning me was the last thing I expected, and it hit me hard. I felt like I had no one left in the world. As I sit in the corner of the room and write this, I can see Michael and his friends watching TV. Sometimes it seems like he notices me and looks my way, but I know better. I have now resigned to my fate. He created me, but forgot to destroy me. In 1984, there lived an old widowed lady by herself in a 2-story house who was completely immobile and bound to her wheelchair. Ever since the mysterious death of her husband, she required the aid of a carer who would visit her daily to help her with everyday tasks. What made it even more difficult was the fact that the 2 floors of the house were only connected by an old staircase inside. When the old lady needed to move between the 2, the carer would have to carry her frail body like an infant up and down the stairs. One day, the police received a call from the widow. There had been a murder. Since police units were scarce at the time, and the murderer had already fled the scene, only one detective was sent out to conduct the initial crime scene report. He arrived to see the carer's body splayed out on the floor, with her vocal cords ripped out in a pool of blood on the first level of the house, with the old lady atop the staircase in her wheelchair watching him, still and silently, seemingly in shock. He could immediately rule her out as a suspect due to her inability to move up and down the stairs, and because she was trapped up there the time the murder took place. It was similar to the death of her husband many years ago, who had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs. The detective put on his gloves, took photos, swabbed for evidence, and covered the body until the coroner arrived later. All routine business. He scoped the house downstairs for any clues, then asked the old lady if he could look upstairs. She insisted that she was upstairs the whole time, and no one, apart from her, had been up there that day. But regardless of this, the detective ascended the staircase, to which she hesitantly moved aside. Beyond the staircase, there was a narrow corridor, with 3 closed doors along it. He checked behind each of the doors. The empty bedroom, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. He became anxious as he slowly made his way to the final bedroom, where the old lady slept. He opened it and everything looked normal. A bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table with a lamp. He checked every wall of the room in horror, as it was not what he discovered, but it was what he didn't discover that made him stop dead in his tracks and slowly reach for his gun in its holster. It was a detail so minor that they had completely overlooked it on the last investigation of the husband's death. There was no phone upstairs. He suddenly heard a noise as he withdrew his gun and rushed out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair atop the stairs. It started with my 3-year-old son screaming in his room in the middle of the night. When I came in to check on him, he was in hysterics. Tears ran down his little cheeks as he cried about how the boogeyman had frightened him. I let him sleep with my wife and I for the night, thinking it was just a bad dream. The next evening, he didn't even want to be in his room, but I convinced him that the boogeyman was just a figment of his imagination. I was awoken once more by his screams. I rushed to his room to find him in tears again. On the 3rd night, I set up a camcorder in his room in order to show him that there was no monster. That evening, there was no screaming and no crying. I was refreshed when I woke up in the morning after having gotten my first good night's sleep in 3 days. However, my son did seem fatigued. He didn't even put up his usual fuss in the morning when we got him ready for preschool. When my wife took him to daycare, I decided to review the camera's tape in order to find out how he had slept. I'll never forget what I saw. At around 2 a.m., while my son was asleep, his closest door slowly creaked open. Out of the shadows crept a pale, naked, veiny woman with long white hair and solid black eyes. Her body was bony and frail, like that of a Holocaust survivor. When she turned to the side, I could see her spine protruding from her hunched back, like a dinosaur. She reached into my son's crib with her unnaturally large hands and covered his mouth. He was trying to scream, but he couldn't. The palm of one of her hands easily enveloped his head. muffling his cries. She snatched him up with the ease that a person of her frame should not have had, then walked back into the closet with him in her arms. An hour later, she returned with what looked like a wriggling maggot the size of a duffel bag, and placed it in my son's bed before retreating once more into the closet. Over the next 2 hours, I watched it twist and writhe, while it grew and mutated until it looked just like my baby boy. Once the transformation was complete, it got out of bed and slipped on a pair of his pajamas, then slid back between the covers and waited for us to come in. I don't know what that thing is that left with my wife this morning, but I know it's not my son. I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remember during a particularly vicious era, when the bombings rarely stopped, I would stay at home sitting in front of my television, watching a very, very strange show. It was a kids' show that lasted about 30 minutes and contained strange and sinister images. To this day, I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on the part of the media to use scare tactics to keep kids in place, because the moral of every episode revolved around very uptight ideologies. Stuff like, bad kids stay up late, bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep, and bad kids steal food from the fridge at night. It was very weird, and in Arabic to top it off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every episode. The camera would zoom in an old, rusted, closed door. As it got closer to the door, strange and sometimes even agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then a text would appear on the screen in Arabic reading, "That's where bad kids go." Eventually, both the image and the sound would fade out, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 or 16 years later, I became a journalist photographer. That show had been in my mind all my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually I had enough and decided to do some research. I finally managed to uncover the location of the studio, where much of that channel's programming had been recorded. Upon further research and eventually traveling on site, I found out it was now desolate and had been abandoned after the big war ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burned out from the inside. Either a fire had broken out, or someone had wanted to incinerate all of the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studio and snapping pictures, I found an isolated, out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to break the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood, feces, and tiny bone fragments lay scattered across the floor. It was a small room and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me, though, what made me turn away and never want to come back, was the bolted, caged microphone. hanging from the roof in the middle of the room.